The coffee spread across the design mock-up like a slow-motion catastrophe, brown liquid seeping into weeks of work. Claire Morrison froze, her hand still holding the empty cup, watching her career dissolve into a caffeinated mess. She heard
How's the
the
report
footsteps
coming
before
along?
she saw him.
Almost done, just
That
finalizing the
deliberate
projections.
pace,
Great.
that measured stride. Sebastian Ashbourne walked past her desk without breaking rhythm. His eyes never left the hallway ahead. Carelessness
okay,
is
just breathe with
expensive,
me.
Ms. Morrison.
I can't. It's too much.
5
Look at the
words,
fire,
not
it's
even a
peaceful.
glance.
Yeah, it is.
Just that cold voice floating back over his shoulder like winter wind through an open door. Then he was gone, disappearing into his corner office, leaving Claire alone with her ruined work and the whispers starting up around the cubicles. 2 years. She had worked at Ashbourne Industries for 2 entire years, and Sebastian had never looked at her. Not really looked. Not the way you look at another human being. He looked at her the way someone might glance at a piece of furniture, acknowledging its existence, noting its function, moving on. The morning light through the Portland office windows caught the coffee stain just right. It looked like a wound. Claire felt something twist in her chest. Not embarrassment. Not anymore. Something harder. Something that had been building for 730 days of invisible servitude. She hated him. The thought came clear and cold and surprisingly liberating. She hated Sebastian Ashbourne with the kind of quiet intensity that comes from being consistently, relentlessly overlooked, from having her best work reduced to adequate, her creativity deemed unnecessary, her voice unheard in every meeting where he sat at the head of the table in his charcoal suit and his silver watch, making decisions that affected her work without ever once asking her opinion. The other designers gathered around her desk now, offering napkins and sympathy. Sarah, her closest friend in the office, squeezed her shoulder. He's the Ice King. Everyone knows it. Don't let him get to you. But Claire was already replaying that first interview 2 years ago. She'd been so excited. Ashbourne Industries was prestigious. The salary was good. Sebastian had been professional during the interview. Thorough, fair even. But there had been nothing warm in those gray eyes. Nothing that suggested he saw her as anything more than a resume and a portfolio, a set of skills he could utilize. He'd hired her for efficiency, she realized now, not for creativity, not for the innovative designs she'd dreamed of creating. He wanted safe, corporate, profitable, everything that made her heart sink a little deeper every Monday morning. Her phone buzzed, an email from Sebastian's assistant. Emergency meeting, conference room 3, 5 minutes. Claire's stomach dropped. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and anxiety. Sebastian stood at the head of the long table, his back to the windows. Behind him, the Portland skyline stretched out in the weak morning light. He looked like he belonged in that frame. Sharp lines, clean edges, no softness anywhere. 3 other employees sat around the table. Senior staff, people who'd been with the company for a decade or more. Claire slipped into a seat near the door, trying to make herself small, trying to understand why she was here with people so far above her pay grade. Sebastian didn't waste time on pleasantries. We have a pitch in Seattle tomorrow. Major client, potentially the largest contract this quarter. His voice was even, controlled, like everything else about him. He pulled up a presentation on the screen. Claire recognized some of her own design work in the mock-ups, work he'd critiqued as adequate, work that apparently was good enough to show a major client. The irony wasn't lost on her. Henderson and Richardson will present the business proposal. Davis will handle the technical specifications. He paused. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Claire for maybe the 3rd time in 2 years. Morrison, you'll present the design concept. The room went quiet. Claire felt everyone's eyes turn toward her. This wasn't how things worked. Junior designers didn't present to major clients. They did the work. Senior people took the credit. That was the unspoken rule. Sir, the flight leaves at 7 a.m., private terminal, don't be late. And just like that, he was done. No discussion, no explanation. He closed his laptop and walked out, leaving Claire sitting there with her heart hammering and her mind spinning and absolutely no idea what had just happened. Sarah found her in the bathroom 20 minutes later. Claire was staring at herself in the mirror, trying to process everything. 6 hours on a private jet with Ice King. Sarah's reflection appeared beside hers. Girl, you need a flask. He's sending me to Seattle. Me. I've never presented to a client before. Maybe he finally noticed you're the best designer we have. Claire shook her head. Sebastian Ashbourne didn't notice people. He noticed numbers, metrics, bottom lines. Whatever his reason for including her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about something else. Something calculated. 6 hours, she said quietly. 6 hours trapped in a metal tube with the man I hate most in the world. Sarah tried for a joke about plane crashes, but it fell flat. Neither of them laughed, if only they'd known. The private terminal was a different world. Quiet, elegant, the kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted. Claire arrived 30 minutes early, her laptop bag cutting into her shoulder, her stomach a knot of nerves. Sebastian was already there. Of course he was. Probably arrived an hour early. Probably already reviewed every document 3 times. He sat in one of the leather chairs, reading something on his tablet, a cup of black coffee on the table beside him. He wore a different suit today. Still charcoal, still perfectly tailored, still radiating that aura of untouchable control. He looked up when she entered, acknowledged her presence with a slight nod, then went back to his reading. Claire chose a seat across the small waiting area. Not too close, not too far, the appropriate professional distance. She pulled out her own laptop and pretended to review the presentation, but her eyes kept drifting to him. Who was Sebastian Ashbourne, really? She knew the public facts. Everyone did. Took over his family's company at 25 after his parents died. Turned it from a regional firm into a national player. Known for his ruthless efficiency, his emotional distance, his ability to make the hard decisions without hesitation. But what about the private facts? What about the person underneath that expensive suit? Did he have hobbies? Did he laugh? Did he ever let that guard down? Did he ever get lonely in that tower of ice he'd built around himself? The thought surprised her. She pushed it away. She didn't care about Sebastian Ashbourne's inner life. She cared about surviving this trip, delivering her presentation, getting back to Portland without completely humiliating herself. A flight attendant appeared to escort them to the plane. The aircraft was exactly what Claire expected. Small, luxurious, the kind of private jet that probably cost more per flight than she made in a year. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, windows that seemed bigger than they should be. 8 seats total, only 2 passengers. Claire chose a seat on the right side. Sebastian took the one across the aisle. They sat in silence as the pilots completed their pre-flight checks. The engines hummed to life, a low, powerful sound that vibrated through the cabin. She tried to focus on her laptop, tried to review her notes one more time, but she was intensely aware of him sitting 4 feet away, could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive, could hear the quiet tap of his fingers on his own keyboard. They'd never been this close before, never spent this much time in the same space. In the office, she could hide in her cubicle, could avoid the break room when he was there, could time her arrivals and departures to minimize contact. But here, trapped in this flying tube of metal and fuel, there was nowhere to hide. The plane began to taxi. Claire looked out the window, watching the terminal building slide past. The morning sun was stronger now, burning off the last of the fog. It was going to be a clear day for flying. Perfect weather, nothing to worry about. She had no idea how wrong she was. The first hour passed in uncomfortable silence. Claire kept her eyes on her ecran, scrolling through the same slides over and over without really seeing them. Sebastian worked on something that required his complete focus. His face was a mask, unreadable, the way it always was. The flight attendant brought them drinks, coffee for him, water for her. Claire's hand shook slightly as she accepted the glass. She hoped he didn't notice. But of course he noticed. Sebastian Ashbourne noticed everything. Nervous about the presentation? His voice cut through the engine noise. Not unkind, just observational. Claire looked over at him. This was maybe the longest sentence he'd directed at her in months. A little, she admitted. He nodded once, returned to his work. That was it, the extent of their conversation. But something about the exchange lodged in her chest. He'd actually asked her a question. It was small, insignificant, probably, but it was more than she'd gotten from him in 2 years. Maybe he was human after all. Maybe. The turbulence started in the second hour, just a gentle rocking at first, the kind of movement that was normal at altitude. Claire was used to flying. She traveled for work sometimes. This was nothing unusual. She kept scrolling through her presentation, making tiny adjustments to slide transitions. But then the rocking got stronger. The plane dipped suddenly, just a few feet, but enough to make Claire's stomach lurch. Her laptop slid an inch across the tray table. She caught it, pressed it flat, looked out the window. Mountains. They were flying over the Cascade Range now. She could see the peaks below, covered in ancient forest. So much green, so much wilderness. It looked beautiful and hostile at the same time. The kind of place where nature still ruled, where humans were just visitors. Another jolt. Harder this time. Seatbelt tight. Claire's head snapped toward Sebastian. He was looking at her now. Actually looking at her. Not through her, not past her. At her. It was the first time she'd seen concern in those gray eyes. Yes, she managed. He nodded, but he didn't look away. Didn't go back to his work. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat, knuckles white. That was when Claire realized this wasn't normal turbulence. This was something wrong. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Calm, professional, but with an undertone that made Claire's blood run cold. Folks, we've got a situation here, experiencing some mechanical difficulties. We're going to attempt an emergency landing. Please ensure your seatbelts are secure and prepare for impact. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds, just syllables arranged in an order that her brain couldn't quite process. Emergency landing. Prepare for impact. Claire's laptop crashed to the floor. The screen shattered with a sound like breaking bones. She barely heard it. The plane was falling. Not fast. Not yet. But definitely descending. And the descent felt wrong. Too steep. Too sharp. She looked at Sebastian again. He was already moving. The plane tilted violently to the left. Overhead compartments burst open. Bags tumbled out like entrails. Papers scattered through the cabin like panicked birds. The oxygen masks dropped, dangling from the ceiling on their thin plastic tubes. Claire's hands flew to her armrests. Her nails dug into the leather. Every muscle in her body locked tight. The world outside the window was spinning now. Green and blue mixing together in a blur that made no sense. The mountains were too close. The trees too detailed. She could see individual branches, individual rocks. Things that should have been tiny dots were becoming massive obstacles. They were going to die. The thought arrived with absolute clarity. No panic, no drama, just cold, certain knowledge. This plane was going to hit those mountains. They were going to die in fire and metal and broken trees. The engines screamed. One cut out completely. The sudden silence was worse than any noise. The remaining engines struggled alone, a desperate whine that couldn't possibly be enough. The cabin erupted into chaos. Alarms shrieked, metal groaned. The very bones of the aircraft twisted under forces they were never meant to endure. The sound was visceral, animal, the sound of something dying. Claire couldn't breathe. Her chest felt crushed by invisible weight. Her vision tunneled, the edges of the world going dark. All she could see was the spinning forest outside her window. Coming closer, closer, seconds away now. She was going to without ever really living, die invisible, die unnoticed, die with all her designs still in her head and all her dreams still locked in her chest. She looked across the aisle one last time. Sebastian's eyes met hers. For one impossible heartbeat, the mask was gone. The Ice King vanished. In his place was just a man. Terrified, helpless, human. They saw each other, really saw each other, for the first and maybe last time, and then he moved. Sebastian unbuckled his seatbelt. The plane was diving now, the angle impossible, but somehow he pulled himself across the aisle, reached for her. His hands found her shoulders, strong, steady despite the chaos. He pulled her down into a brace position, covered her body with his own, made himself a shield between her and whatever was coming. Stay down, he said against her ear, his voice rough with fear but still controlled, still trying to protect. Don't let go. Claire's last conscious thought before impact was simple and devastating. He tried to save me. The Ice King tried to save me. The world exploded in sound and fury, metal screaming, glass shattering, trees splintering. The impact was a physical blow that drove the air from her lungs and rattled her teeth in her skull. Something hot sprayed across her face. Blood maybe, fuel maybe, she couldn't tell. The plane hit the ground and kept moving, tearing through the forest like a bullet through flesh. Branches penetrated the fuselage. One massive limb speared through the cabin inches from where her head had been. The smell of jet fuel mixed with pine and earth and terror. Then finally, mercifully, they stopped moving. And then there was nothing. Just darkness and silence and the distant sound of something burning silence. That was the first thing Claire registered when consciousness returned. Not absence of sound, exactly, but wrong sound. Forest sound, bird calls, wind through trees, the crackle of something on fire. Not engine noise, not the hum of pressurized air, not the sounds of being 30,000 feet in the sky. Her head throbbed, a deep percussive ache that pulsed behind her eyes. She tried to open them, but her vision swam. Everything was tilted. Nothing made sense. She blinked. Once. Twice. The world slowly resolved itself into shapes that her brain could recognize. Twisted metal. Shattered glass. A tree branch. Massive. Impossibly thick. It had punched through the fuselage and stopped maybe 6 inches from where her face would have been if Sebastian hadn't pulled her down. If Sebastian hadn't... Sebastian. Claire's body moved before her mind caught up. Pain screamed through her ribs as she fumbled with her seatbelt. The buckle was stuck. Jammed. She pulled at it with shaking hands until finally it clicked open. The sound was too loud in the unnatural quiet. She tried to stand. Her legs didn't want to cooperate. Everything hurt. Not sharp pain, dull pain, the kind that meant bruising and trauma, but nothing immediately fatal. She could move. She was alive. The realization hit her like a second impact. I'm alive. The cabin was destroyed. Barely recognizable as the pristine space she'd boarded hours ago, the ceiling was partially collapsed. Wiring hung like mechanical intestines. The floor tilted at a grotesque angle. Debris everywhere. A deck of playing cards scattered across the wreckage. Someone's leather shoe. The champagne flute that had been secured in the galley, now overturned and somehow unbroken. Claire pushed toward where the exit should be, but there was no exit anymore. Just a gaping hole where a window used to be. She climbed through it, her hands finding purchase on jagged metal edges. She felt something cut her palm, but couldn't spare the attention to check how bad. She had to get out, had to get away from the smell of fuel and the smoke and the terrible wrongness of it all. Her feet hit solid ground and her knees immediately gave out. She collapsed onto damp earth, moss and pine needles. The forest floor was soft, almost welcoming. She lay there for a moment, her cheek against cool dirt, just breathing. The air tasted like life. She'd forgotten how good air could taste. The forest surrounded her, dense, ancient. The trees were massive, old growth, the kind that took centuries to create. They rose up like cathedral pillars, their canopies so thick that only fragments of sky showed through. It was beautiful in a way that was almost hostile. This was nature's domain. Humans were intruders here. That's when she heard it. A low groan, human, in pain. Claire's head snapped toward the sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to bruise. 30 feet away, slumped against the base of an ancient oak, was Sebastian Ashbourne, her boss, the Ice King, the man whose cold indifference had been the bane of her professional existence for 2 years. He was bleeding. The perfect navy suit was torn at the shoulder. A deep gash on his forehead wept a steady stream of blood that traced a path down his temple. It dripped from his jaw into the dark soil. His white shirt was no longer white, stained with blood and dirt and the violence of impact. But it wasn't the blood that shocked Claire. It was his expression. For the first time since she'd started working at Ashbourne Industries, she saw Sebastian stripped of his armor. The formidable fortress had crumbled. He wasn't issuing orders. He wasn't scowling with that familiar, icy disapproval. He was just breathing, raggedly, fighting to anchor himself back in the world. His eyes found hers. A current of raw recognition passed between them. Not relief, not gratitude, just the stark shared knowledge of what they'd just survived. The impossible fact that they were still breathing when they shouldn't be. Claire forced her body to move. Her legs trembled, but held. She covered the distance between them in seconds that felt like hours. Dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered over his injuries, uncertain where to start. Are you hurt? His voice was a rough rasp, but focused. No panic in it, only tightly controlled urgency. He was asking about her, checking on her. Even now, even broken and bleeding, his first question was about someone else. I don't think so. Her own voice sounded like a stranger's. Thin, reedy, barely there. Sebastian tried to push himself up. His body betrayed him. He swayed dangerously to the left. On pure instinct, Claire grabbed his arm to steady him. Her hands closed around his bicep. The fabric of his suit was rough under her fingers, the muscle beneath it hard as stone. She'd never touched him before. Not a handshake at her interview. Not a brush in the hallway. In 2 years of working together, they'd never had physical contact. Now she was holding him up while he fought to stay conscious. A jolt shot through her. Electric. Unexpected. Not attraction. Not exactly. Something more fundamental. The shock of human contact. Of warmth and solidity and the reminder that bodies were real and fragile and precious. Thank you. The words were so quiet she almost missed them. But they landed in her chest like stones in still water, creating ripples, spreading outward. Sebastian had never thanked her for anything. They stood there, or rather Claire stood, and Sebastian leaned heavily against the tree, trying to pretend he wasn't seconds away from collapse. The forest breathed around them. Birds began to call again, tentative at first, then with more confidence. Life resuming after violence. Sebastian's gaze swept the area. Even now, even battered and bleeding, his mind was working. Claire could see it in his eyes. The shift from victim to strategist, from overwhelmed to calculating. We need to check for other survivors. It wasn't an order. His voice lacked its usual authority. It was a statement of fact, almost a request for her to agree. Claire nodded. Her mind was still reeling, but she understood. They had to check, had to know. Together they moved through the wreckage. The plane had torn a path through the forest like a dying animal. Trees snapped off at their bases. Earth churned up. Metal scattered across hundreds of feet. They called out, shouted names, the pilot, the co-pilot, anyone. Only silence answered. They found the pilot still strapped in his seat. Claire looked away quickly, but not fast enough. The image burned itself into her brain. Another thing she'd never forget. Another scar this day was carving into her soul. Sebastian pulled a tarp from the wreckage, covered the body, said something quiet that might have been a prayer. Claire didn't know he prayed, didn't know he believed in anything beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. She was learning that she didn't know him at all. When they finished searching, the crushing reality descended on Claire like a physical weight. They were alone, the two of them, stranded in wilderness that stretched for miles in every direction. No communication, no rescue beacon, no sign that help was coming. And the only other soul for miles was the man she'd been so sure she could never stand. Sebastian turned to her, used the back of his torn sleeve to wipe blood from his brow. The gesture was weary, almost defeated. But when his gaze met hers, Claire saw something that frightened her more than the crash. Pure, unyielding determination. We are going to survive this. His voice was low but solid as bedrock. An oath, a promise, a command to the universe itself. I promise you. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of everything familiar, Claire realized something dreadful and undeniable. She believed him. The fire was the first miracle. Claire watched with something approaching disbelief as Sebastian Ashbourne knelt on the damp forest floor. He moved with focused, almost surgical precision, stripping bark from a dry branch with a shard of metal salvaged from the wreckage, gathering tinder with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. These were the same hands she'd only ever seen gliding over an iPad to approve million-dollar contracts, typing dismissive emails that could end a career in under 10 words. Now they were smudged with dirt, scratched and raw, working to coax life from friction and wood. He didn't complain, didn't even sigh in frustration. Just worked with the kind of single-minded concentration she'd seen him apply to quarterly reports. How do you know how to do this? The question slipped out before Claire could stop it. Her voice sounded small in the vast quiet of the woods. Strange how silence could be loud, how the absence of city noise felt like pressure against her eardrums. Sebastian didn't look up. His concentration was absolute. The muscles in his forearm tensed under the rolled-up sleeve of his ruined shirt as he began to rub a spindle against a fireboard he'd fashioned from a piece of the plane's interior paneling. My father. 2 words, offered without elaboration. His voice neutral, a low rumble against the whisper of wood on wood. He believed a man should know how to survive with nothing but what the world gave him. A wisp of smoke curled upward, thin, gray, fragile as hope. Claire held her breath, felt like the entire forest was holding its breath with her. Sebastian leaned in closer, blew gently, protectively, like coaxing life into something newborn and impossibly delicate. A tiny spark glowed in the tinder, then another, and suddenly a small flame flickered to life, dancing between his cupped hands. He looked at the flame for a long moment. In the soft golden light, Claire saw the tension in his shoulders ease by a fraction. Such a small victory, such an enormous achievement. He had brought light back into the darkness. They'd crashed maybe 3 hours ago. 3 hours since the world turned upside down. 3 hours since everything Claire thought she knew about life and safety and the order of things had been violently rearranged. And now there was fire. They established a crude camp near the wreckage. Sebastian orchestrated everything with a chilling efficiency that was both alien and deeply reassuring. He salvaged a large, partially intact piece of the cabin's interior lining. With a length of wire he'd stripped from a seat, he rigged a makeshift lean-to between two thick trees. Claire tried to help, tried to be useful, but she felt clumsy and out of her depth. Every task she thought of, he was already 3 steps ahead. She gathered wood, but he'd already found a fallen log that was drier. She tried to sort through the salvageable items, but he'd already prioritized water, shelter, and warmth. She watched him work and felt something shift in her understanding. This wasn't the Sebastian Ashbourne she knew, or thought she knew. That man lived in conference rooms and corner offices, made decisions from leather chairs, never got his hands dirty. This Sebastian was different, competent in a way that had nothing to do with business acumen. Moving through the wilderness like someone who'd done this before, who'd been taught, who remembered. "Do you know how to tie a taut-line hitch?" He appeared beside her suddenly, holding up a length of cord he'd scavenged from somewhere in the wreckage. His voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Not exactly. Claire felt a familiar flush of inadequacy, that feeling of being tested and found wanting. But Sebastian's response surprised her. "It's all right, I'll show you." No judgment in his voice, no criticism, just patience. He stood behind her, his voice low and steady, as he guided her hands through the loops and pulls. He was close, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cooling afternoon air. The scent of wood smoke clung to him now, mingling with that expensive cologne that was somehow still there underneath the sweat and blood and forest. His fingers brushed against hers as he adjusted the knot. Claire pulled her hand back, as if burned. "Why are you being like this?" The words tumbled out, raw, unfiltered. She hadn't meant to say them, but they were out now, hanging in the air between them like smoke. Sebastian paused, his hands stilled on the rope. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the deepening shadows of the forest. Like what? So different. He let go of the rope, turned to face her fully. For a long moment he just looked at her, those gray eyes unreadable in the flickering firelight. Then he let out a slow breath, walked over to a log near the fire, sat down heavily. The movement was weary in a way Claire had never seen from him, like the armor was finally too heavy to hold up. "In the office, I am what the board expects me to be." His gaze was fixed on the dancing flames, not looking at her, maybe not wanting to see her reaction. "What my uncle molded me into after my parents died." He paused. The name of his uncle hung in the air like a chill, like mentioning it had dropped the temperature 10 degrees. "Richard." Another pause, longer this time. Claire stayed quiet, sensing that this was important, that he was giving her something he didn't give easily. "Here, there's no room for that. There are no board members, no stock prices." He gestured vaguely at the dark looming trees surrounding their small circle of firelight. "There is only this, only survival." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Claire understood suddenly that she was seeing something real, something true, the man beneath the ice. And it terrified her almost as much as the crash had. That night, the temperature plummeted. Claire hadn't expected it. The afternoon had been cool but not uncomfortable. But as darkness fell complete and absolute, a cold, damp chill seeped up from the ground. Relentless, invasive. It got into her bones, made her teeth chatter, made her curl into herself trying to conserve heat that was bleeding away too fast. She huddled by the fire, arms wrapped tightly around herself. But the shivering was a deep internal tremor she couldn't control. Her body was burning through calories it didn't have, trying to stay warm. She bit her lip, refused to complain, refused to show the weakness she felt. But Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. Sebastian Ashbourne noticed everything. That's what made him so good at his job. He saw details others missed, patterns in data, weaknesses in proposals, the slight trembling of a junior designer trying not to freeze to death. Without a word, he stood up, removed his torn suit jacket, the last remaining layer he had, walked over to her side of the fire, held it out. "No, Claire's protest was immediate, automatic. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form the word. "You'll freeze." "I'm warmer than you are." It was a simple statement of fact, no ego, no heroism, just observation. He was bigger, more mass, more muscle, more body heat to spare. Sebastian. His name felt strange in her mouth. She'd said it before, in meetings, in emails, but never like this, never with his full attention on her, Never while he stood over her offering his jacket like some kind of medieval knight. Please. His voice was firm, cutting through her protest. But it lacked that usual icy edge she was so familiar with. It was just certain, sure, absolute. Claire looked up at him, at the genuine concern etched into his face. A face she'd only ever seen set in a mask of cool authority. Something inside her shifted. Another tectonic plate of long-held animosity grinding into a new position. Slowly her hands reached out, took the jacket. She pulled it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body. It carried his scent. Smoke and forest and something uniquely, indefinably him. It felt like a shield, like armor, like safety. He gave a single sharp nod, returned to his spot on the other side of the fire, started rubbing his arms against the cold. The white shirt that had been so pristine this morning was torn and stained. It wouldn't keep him warm, not nearly warm enough. Claire watched him. A painful knot tightened in her chest, a confusing tangle of guilt and gratitude and something else, something warmer and far more dangerous. Thank you. She whispered it across the flames, hoping he'd hear, hoping he wouldn't. He inclined his head, eyes already heavy with an exhaustion so profound it seemed to weigh him down like gravity had increased. His shoulders sagged, his movements slowing. Try to sleep, he said. We'll need energy tomorrow. But Claire couldn't sleep. She watched the fire spit and crackle. A lone beacon against the oppressive, living darkness of the forest. Night sounds surrounded them, things moving through the undergrowth. Owls calling, the distant sound of water running over rocks. And she watched Sebastian. He was shivering, trying to hide it, his movements small and controlled. But in the stark dancing light of the fire, she could see the tremors running through his body, see him trying to make himself smaller, to conserve heat that was bleeding away as fast as hers had been. He'd given her his jacket knowing this would happen. Made a choice, her warmth over his own. The Ice King making a sacrifice. It didn't fit the man she'd built in her head, the villain of her professional life, the symbol of everything cold and corporate and unfeeling about the business world. That man would never give up his jacket. But this man had. This man was sitting across a fire, shivering in the cold, because he'd chosen her comfort over his own. Before Claire could second-guess the impulse, before logic could intervene, before fear could stop her, she was on her feet. She walked around the fire, each step feeling momentous, like crossing some invisible line from which there was no return. She sat down beside him on the cold, hard ground. What are you doing? Sebastian's voice was thick with exhaustion, his eyes still closed, head tilted back against the log behind him. Sharing. One word. That's all Claire offered. She draped the jacket over both of them, a makeshift blanket, scooted close enough that their shoulders and hips pressed together. The shared space was instantly warmer. Not comfortable, but better. Survivable. Sebastian's eyes opened. They were dark pools in the firelight, reflecting the flames like windows into something burning inside him. He looked at her, then at the jacket covering them both, then back at her. You don't have to do that. I know. A heavy silence fell, filled only by the sound of the fire and the distant call of some nocturnal creature, the forest breathing around them. Then, so slowly she almost didn't feel it, Sebastian leaned into her, a subtle shift of weight, an acceptance, a surrender. Claire's heart began to beat a heavy, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was acutely aware of every point of contact, his shoulder against hers, his thigh pressed against hers, the steady, solid presence of him. She hated Sebastian Ashbourne. She'd built 2 years of her professional life around the certainty of that hatred. It was a solid, dependable thing, the foundation on which she understood their relationship. Boss and employee, Ice King and invisible designer. Him in his tower of success, her in her cubicle of resentment. But the man shivering beside her, the man who had given her his last layer of warmth, the man who was now trusting her enough to lean on her, to accept help, to show weakness. She had to admit something terrifying. She had no idea who that man was. And as Claire sat there sharing a jacket and a sliver of warmth under a canopy of unfamiliar stars, an impossible thought began to bloom in the darkness of her mind. She wasn't sure she hated him at all anymore. The night deepened around them. The fire burned low, and two people who'd been strangers in everything but proximity began to understand that survival would require more than fire and shelter. It would require trust. And that might be the hardest thing they'd have to build. Claire woke to the smell of roasting fish and the alien sound of birdsong. For a disorienting moment, her mind clung to the memory of her warm bed, her small apartment, the familiar city sounds of Portland traffic and neighbors, and the coffee shop on the corner. Then reality returned with a jolt, the dull ache in her back from sleeping on hard ground, the chill in the air that even Sebastian's jacket hadn't completely banished. The heavy weight of that jacket still draped over her shoulders. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, her body cataloging all the ways yesterday had damaged it. Across the dying embers of the fire, Sebastian was crouched by a small clear stream she hadn't noticed in the darkness. He was turning two small silver-skinned fish, skewered on green branches over flames he'd somehow coaxed back to life from the night's embers. "You fished." The words came out raspy, her throat raw from smoke and cold, and the screaming she'd done during the crash. Had that only been yesterday? It felt like a lifetime ago. Sebastian glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time since Claire had met him, she saw something she would have sworn was impossible on the face of Sebastian Ashbourne. A smile. Not his corporate predatory smile. Not that tight-lipped expression he gave to investors and board members. This one was small, hesitant, almost shy. It barely touched his lips, but it lit something in his eyes. Woke up early. His voice was still rough from sleep, from exhaustion, from everything. Found the stream about 200 yards that way. He nodded in the direction of thicker trees. Figured we needed protein. Claire blinked, pushed her tangled hair out of her face. It was a mess. Probably looked like she'd been dragged through a forest, which technically she had been. And you caught fish with your hands? Improvisation. He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if CEOs caught fish with their bare hands every day. He lifted one of the sticks from the fire. The fish sizzled, its skin perfectly crisped, golden brown, actually appetizing despite the circumstances. Eat. We need the energy. They ate in silence. Claire hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. Then her body woke up, reminded her that she'd had nothing but airplane coffee yesterday, that she'd survived a plane crash and spent a freezing night in the wilderness, that calories were survival now. The fish was good, smoky, a little overcooked maybe, but who was she to judge? Sebastian Ashbourne had caught and cooked fish with his bare hands and salvaged materials. The Ice King was turning out to be more resourceful than she'd ever imagined. When they finished, Claire watched him work, building up the fire, checking the lean-to, organizing the salvaged supplies with the same efficiency he'd brought to quarterly reports. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. "We should explore today." He said it while securing a torn piece of fabric over a gap in their shelter. Not looking at her, just stating the plan. "Find high ground, maybe signal for rescue." Claire noticed the shift. He said we, not I, not you should, we. Partnership implicit, assumed. "I can help." She stood, brushed dirt from her pants. The office clothes she'd worn yesterday were ruined, her blouse torn, her slacks stained with mud and blood and jet fuel. "My grandmother taught me about plants." Sebastian's eyebrow raised. Interest flickered across his face. Not dismissal, not the blank professional mask, actual interest. "Taught you?" "Botany. She had a ranch in Montana. Believed nature has answers, if you know where to look." Something changed in his expression. A softening around the eyes, like he was seeing her differently. Seeing something beyond junior designer, beyond employee number, whatever she was in the company system. "That could be useful," he said quietly. "Very useful." They fell into an unspoken routine as the morning progressed, a rhythm dictated by necessity and survival. Sebastian took charge of securing the camp and mapping the immediate area. Claire explored the flora around them, her grandmother's lessons echoing in her mind like prayers. She found broad, waxy leaves that, when layered, could help waterproof their lean-to. Found edible roots that looked like the ones Grandma Morrison had shown her in that old botanical guide. The one with hand-drawn illustrations and notes in the margins. Claire had been maybe 12. Bored on the ranch, her grandmother had made her memorize which plants could feed you and which could kill you. That boredom might save her life now. She also found a plant with soft, pulpy leaves. The stems broke easily, releasing a clear, sticky sap. She remembered this one. Antiseptic properties. Good for wounds, good for preventing infection. "How do you know all this?" Sebastian's voice made her look up. He was watching her crush the leaves in her hands, working them into a rough paste. His forehead gash was looking angry, red around the edges. It needed attention. My grandmother, she believed nature has an answer for everything if you just know where to look. Claire gestured to the log. Sit, let me clean that. To her surprise, he did, no argument. No, I'm fine. Just sat patiently while she approached with her makeshift medicine. He was so still, like he'd learned to hold himself completely motionless, control even his breathing. She had to get close. Closer than they'd been even when sharing the jacket. Close enough to see the individual whiskers of stubble shadowing his jaw. Close enough to notice a tiny scar above his eyebrow she'd never seen before. Close enough to feel the warmth of his skin, to catch that scent of him underneath the smoke and dirt. Her fingers were gentle, cleaning the dried blood away first, then applying the paste to his forehead. His eyes stayed on her face, tracking her movements. She could feel the weight of his gaze, could feel something shift in the air between them. When she finished, her hand lingered, just a fraction of a second too long, her thumb brushing against his temple. The touch was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with medical care. Sebastian's breath hitched, audible in the forest quiet. Their eyes met. The air between them, already thin at this altitude, suddenly felt thick, charged with something new and unpredictable. Claire pulled her hand back quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs, took a step away. There, that should help prevent infection. Thank you. His voice was low, rough, something in it that made her skin prickle with awareness. I'll gather more firewood, she said. Too quickly, needing distance, needing air. She walked into the forest before he could respond. Later that afternoon, while gathering wood deeper in the trees, Sebastian stopped dead. His hand came up, a signal. Claire froze immediately. Listen. She strained her senses. At first she heard nothing unusual, just the normal forest sounds. Birds, wind, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. Then she understood. The constant chatter of birds had ceased. The rustle of small animals was gone. The entire forest had gone unnervingly still. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was unnatural, wrong, like the world was holding its breath. Sebastian. She whispered his name. A strange shiver ran down her spine, some ancient part of her brain recognizing danger before her conscious mind caught up. Stay behind me. He didn't have to say it twice. Claire moved, her back pressing against his as he scanned the dense trees around them. The filtered sunlight seemed dimmer now, the shadows deeper. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different. And then they saw it. Imprinted in a patch of soft mud near the stream were paw prints. They were huge, larger than Claire's hand. Deep, menacing claw marks pressed into the earth like warnings, like signatures of violence. What kind of animal leaves a track that big? Claire's voice was a choked whisper. She knew the answer. Somewhere in her brain she already knew. But she needed him to say it, needed confirmation that this new nightmare was real. Sebastian knelt, his fingers hovering over the edge of the print, his expression grim, calculating, already working through scenarios and solutions. Something large, feline. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what roamed the deep woods of the Cascade Mountains. Cougar, mountain lion, predators that had ruled these forests for thousands of years. That saw humans as either food or competition. They returned to camp in a tense, hurried silence. Sebastian didn't speak, but his actions were loud. He built the fire up, creating a larger, more formidable circle of light. He took the sharpest piece of metal he'd salvaged and began methodically honing its edge against a flat stone, crafting something that resembled a crude spear. The sound of metal on stone filled the clearing. Rhythmic, ominous, a countdown to nightfall. We'll take watches tonight. His voice was calm, but with an underlying firmness that left no room for argument. I'll take the first shift. When I wake you, you take over. Claire nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. But as night fell, wrapping the forest in a suffocating blanket of darkness, sleep was impossible anyway. Every snap of a twig sent adrenaline flooding through her system. Every rustle of leaves in the wind painted terrifying shapes in her imagination. And then she heard it. It was distant, but unmistakable. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. It was a sound of pure predatory power, ancient, patient, hungry. Claire's eyes shot open. She sat bolt upright, her gaze darting to Sebastian. He was already on his feet, the makeshift spear held tight in his hand, his body a tense silhouette against the flames, his eyes locked on the impenetrable darkness beyond their camp. Don't move, he whispered it, a low command that barely disturbed the air. Claire held her breath, her body paralyzed with fear, and then, for a split second, she saw them. Two yellow eyes glowing like embers in the pitch black, reflecting the firelight. They were watching, calculating, measuring the distance, weighing the risk. The Black Panther, actually a melanistic mountain lion, rare, beautiful, deadly. Sebastian shifted his body, one deliberate movement that placed him squarely between Claire and those eyes, between her and the coming darkness. He became a wall, a shield, everything soft in him hardening into protective steel. If I tell you to run, his voice was low, lethal, eyes never leaving the spot where those yellow orbs burned in the night. You run. Do you understand? I'm not leaving you. Claire's voice was fierce despite the terror flooding her veins. She wasn't sure where the words came from. Some part of her she didn't know existed until this moment. Sebastian turned his head, just enough for her to see his profile carved from stone and shadow. Promise me. But before Claire could answer, the panther took a single deliberate step out of the darkness, its sleek, powerful body emerging into the firelight. And Sebastian moved to meet it. He didn't charge with the spear. He attacked with fire. In one swift, fluid motion, he lunged toward the fire pit, grabbed a thick, burning branch, and hurled it into the darkness just in front of the creature. The log landed with a shower of sparks, a loud hiss, wild dancing light that made the shadows leap and twist. The massive cat recoiled, a deep, furious snarl ripping from its chest, its yellow eyes blazing with indignation at being challenged. Get back! Sebastian's voice was a raw, primal roar that tore through the forest, a sound so full of command and fury it seemed to shake the trees themselves. Claire stared, frozen, watching the man she knew as a cold, calculating CEO transform into something elemental, something wild, a protector. He didn't hesitate, grabbed another burning branch, then another, flinging them in a strategic arc, creating a flickering temporary wall of fire between their camp and the predator. The panther paced back and forth, its sleek black body a ripple of muscle and menace, trapped between its hunting instinct and its primal fear of flames. It let out one last frustrated roar, a sound that vibrated deep in Claire's bones, made her want to run, made her want to curl into a ball, made her want to disappear. And then, with a flick of its tail, the cat melted back into the shadows, gone as suddenly as it had appeared. But Claire knew with chilling certainty it wasn't far. It was out there, going, waiting, patient in the way only apex predators could be patient. The rest of the night was a waking nightmare. Sebastian did not sit, did not rest. He stood sentinel at the edge of the firelight, the metal spear held tight in his grip, his eyes constantly scanning the oppressive darkness. He methodically fed the fire, keeping the flames high and bright, a solitary guardian against the terrors of the night. Claire tried to stay awake with him, her own fear a sharp, bitter taste coating her tongue. But the adrenaline crash combined with days of physical and emotional exhaustion was a tide she couldn't fight. Her head drooped, her eyelids grew heavy. Eventually she slumped against a log and fell into a fitful sleep, filled with images of yellow eyes and glistening teeth. She woke to soft gray light filtering through the canopy. Dawn, morning, survival. The first thing she saw was Sebastian, still there, still standing, still awake. He was leaning against a tree now, the spear resting at his side. But his posture was rigid, his gaze still fixed on the surrounding woods. He'd stayed up all night, the entire night, watching, protecting. You didn't sleep. Claire scrambled to her feet, a pang of guilt and awe tightening her chest. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His face was pale with exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly where they gripped the spear. Couldn't risk it. His voice was rough, strained, like vocal cords scraped raw. Sebastian, you have to rest. I'm fine. But the slight tremor in his hands and the dark, bruised look under his eyes told a different story. He pushed himself off the tree, and his exhaustion was plain to see. He swayed, catching himself with a hand against the rough bark, his body betraying him. Claire closed the distance between them, her hand instinctively going to his arm, steadying him, supporting him, the way he'd supported her. You're not fine. You need to sleep. I'll keep watch. Claire, you don't know how to. I know how to feed a fire. I know how to scream. She met his gaze, her expression firm, leaving no room for argument. Some part of her had changed. Some part of her had grown stronger in this wilderness. found a spine she didn't know she had. Let me take care of you, just for a few hours. He looked at her, a long, searching moment, his defenses warring with his body's desperate need for rest. Finally, with a slow, reluctant exhale, he gave a single sharp nod. A few hours, only. He lay down near the fire. Claire expected him to be asleep before his head hit the bundled leaves she'd arranged as a pillow, but he wasn't. He lay there, body still tense, eyes half closed, breathing shallow and uneven. I can't, he admitted it, voice a low rasp of frustration. Can't switch it off. Without thinking, without allowing herself to hesitate, without questioning the impulse. Claire sat down on the ground beside him, and then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took his hand. Sebastian went utterly still. His eyes flew open, wide and startled, locking onto hers. His hand was cold in hers, but it was strong, his fingers long and calloused from the work of survival. I'm right here, Claire said it softly, her voice a gentle anchor in the quiet morning. The forest breathing around them, birds beginning their songs again, life resuming. Nothing is going to happen. I'll wake you if I see anything. He stared at their joined hands as if he'd never seen hands before, as if the concept of touch was foreign. Then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, his fingers curled, lacing through hers. The connection was solid, real, electric. Why are you doing this? He whispered it, his gaze lifting to her face, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. All the armor gone, just a man, exhausted, scared, human. Claire didn't have an answer that made sense. Or maybe she did, and that was what scared her. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. Because you would do the same for me. The words felt truer than anything she'd said in years. A flicker of something crossed his face. Gratitude, surprise, relief. It softened the hard lines, made him look younger. Made him look like someone she could know, could care about. And for the first time since the plane had fallen from the sky, Sebastian let his guard down completely. His eyes drifted shut, and with his hand held securely in hers, he finally slept. 3 hours later, Claire was still sitting beside him, her back against a log, her own exhaustion a dull, distant ache. She'd watched the steady rise and fall of his chit, noticed the way sleep smoothed the harsh lines of concentration from his face, made him look peaceful, almost vulnerable. She was still holding his hand, and she had no desire to let go. When Sebastian finally stirred, the sun was high in the sky, casting dappled light through the leaves. He blinked, disoriented, and the first thing he seemed to register was the warmth of her hand still holding his. He looked at their entwined fingers, then at her. Neither of them moved to pull away. Thank you. His voice was thick with sleep and something else she couldn't quite name. Something deeper. Something that felt like the beginning of understanding. Always, Claire heard herself say it, the word feeling both reckless and right. A promise. A commitment. Something that acknowledged this thing growing between them, whether they wanted it or not. In that quiet moment, something fundamental shifted. They weren't boss and employee anymore, weren't even just partners in survival. They were something else, something more dangerous, something inevitable. Sebastian slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, but he didn't release her hand. Instead, he turned to face her more fully, his expression serious, searching. Claire, I need to tell you something. Her heart gave a painful lurch. What? He opened his mouth, closed it, struggling with words, with vulnerability, with breaking down walls he'd spent years building. Back at the office, the way I was. He paused, his gaze dropping to their hands, to that connection between them. I never wanted to be that person, especially not with you. Claire's breath caught. Why? Because my uncle taught me that caring is weakness, that a leader can't be kind, that an Ashbourne can never show. He trailed off, his voice cracking on the last word, breaking on something painful and buried deep. Show what? She prompted it gently, not pushing, just opening the door, letting him decide if he wanted to walk through. Sebastian looked up, and in the raw, unguarded depths of his eyes, Claire saw everything. The crushing loneliness, the weight of a legacy he never asked for, the cold, empty prison he'd built around himself stone by stone. That he cares. 2 words, but they landed in the space between them like earthquake tremors, shifting the foundation, changing the landscape, making everything that came before seem like a different life. Claire's world, which had already been turned upside down once, tilted on its axis all over again. That evening, the sky broke open. It wasn't a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a sudden violent downpour that hammered the forest canopy with enough force to bend branches. The makeshift lean-to shuddered under the assault. Within minutes, cold water began to drip, then stream through the gaps. The fire hissed and sputtered, fighting a losing battle against the onslaught before finally dying with a defeated sigh, plunging their small camp into deeper darkness. They were soaked in seconds. A brutal, bone-deep cold set in, far worse than any night before. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was dangerous, life-threatening, hypothermia territory. We have to stay warm. Sebastian's voice was tight, cutting through the roar of rain, urgent but controlled. Hypothermia is a real threat. He didn't wait for her to agree, pulled her into the driest corner of the shelter, turned his back to the worst of the wind, and wrapped his arms around her, pulled her tight against his chest. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just survival instinct taking over. Claire didn't resist. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She pressed into him, seeking warmth, seeking shelter. His body, though also cold and wet, was solid, a living furnace against the storm. They huddled together, two survivors clinging to each other, the distinction between them dissolving in the shared desperate need to endure. And in the roaring darkness, cocooned together against nature's fury, Sebastian began to talk. His voice was low, steady, an anchor against the chaos of wind and rain. My parents died when I was 15. Car accident. Claire listened in silence, her ear pressed against his chest, feeling the vibration of his words as much as hearing them. Each sentence a confession, each word a piece of armor being set aside. My Uncle Richard took me in, took over the company too, told me I had to be strong, that the world was full of predators, that if I showed any weakness, they'd tear me apart. He took a shaky breath, his arms tightening around her. So I learned to build walls, to treat everything like a transaction, to never, ever let anyone see that someone mattered. He shifted slightly, his voice dropping even lower, more intimate, more raw. At the office, you always looked at me like I was a monster. Claire's chest ached. She started to protest, but he continued. And you were right. My uncle said it's better to be feared and respected than to be liked and seen as weak. So that's what I became. Fear, respect, distance with it. Sebastian, but here, he lifted a hand, cold fingers finding her cheek in the darkness. His thumb stroking the line of her jaw. The gesture was simple, tender, a stark contrast to the violence of the storm. Here I can't pretend anymore. And the truth is, I hate the man I became. But I don't know how to be anyone else. Claire covered his hand with her own, pressed it against her face, holding it there, anchoring them both. Maybe you don't have to learn. Maybe you just have to remember. She whispered it into the storm, into the darkness, into the tiny space between their faces. Remember the person you were before your uncle told you who to be? The person who'd face down a panther to protect someone. The person who'd stay up all night in the cold. That's the real you, not the machine in the suit. The world seemed to shrink to the tiny fragile space they occupied. Sebastian stared down at her, his eyes searching her face for something. Permission, absolution, hope. If I kiss you now. His voice was a raw, desperate rasp, every word costing him something. There's no going back from it. I won't be able to pretend it didn't happen. Claire's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could feel it through her chest, through his chest, through whatever walls remained between them. Then don't pretend. She whispered it against his lips. An invitation, a challenge, a surrender. Sebastian broke. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation, of a man who'd been lost in a desert and had finally found water. It was raw and consuming, freighted with all the fear and hope and terror of the past days, all the loneliness of the past years. Claire melted against him, her hands tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer, meeting his desperation with her own. The kiss tasted of rain and survival and everything they hadn't been able to say, everything they'd been too afraid to acknowledge. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, he didn't let her go, held her tight against his chest as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had fallen apart. I don't want to be that man anymore. He murmured it into her hair, a solemn vow made to the storm, to himself, to her. For the first time in my life, I want to choose. And that night, as the rain washed the world clean, two strangers became something more, something that neither the forest nor the world waiting for them could ever undo. When the rain finally stopped the next morning, leaving the forest washed clean and glistening, a new resolve had settled between them. The kiss had changed everything. The air was no longer thick with unspoken tension, but with the quiet, humming energy of a shared, undeniable truth. Sebastian was the first to break the silence. "We can't stay here." His eyes scanned the dense woods, taking in the impossible distance, the hostile terrain, the reality of their situation with that strategic mind that never fully shut off. "We're too exposed, running out of time." He looked toward the highest peak in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the pale morning sky, and Claire followed his gaze. The mountain looked impossibly far, its slopes steep and treacherous, a challenge that seemed insurmountable after everything they'd already endured. "We have to get to high ground, build a signal fire up there, a big one." He turned to her. His hand found hers, fingers lacing with a natural possessive ease that would have been unthinkable 4 days ago. "We have a chance. Real chance." Claire looked at their joined hands, at the dirt under both their fingernails, at the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles almost unconsciously. Something warm bloomed in her chest, chasing away the morning chill. "Do you think we can make it? Together." He said it like a promise, like an oath, like the only word that mattered anymore. Yes. That single word sent a wave of warmth through her, not just from the meaning, from the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that together they could face anything, even mountains, even impossible odds. They spent the morning preparing. The work was different now, a coordinated dance. No longer him leading and her following. They moved around each other with easy familiarity, their movements punctuated by small smiles and casual touches. A hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed salvaged materials, the language of bodies learning to communicate. Sebastian fashioned 2 makeshift backpacks from the salvaged cabin lining. They packed what little they had, a plastic bottle filled with rainwater, the last of the edible roots Claire had found, the crude spear, the fire-starting kit, everything that might mean the difference between survival and surrender. "You're different," Claire commented as she helped him adjust a strap on his pack, her fingers working the knot he'd taught her days ago. Strange how quickly wilderness skills became second nature when your life depended on them. Sebastian paused, his gaze steady on her, something soft in those gray eyes that had once been so cold. "You are too." She tilted her head, curious. "How?" "In the office you always seemed to be holding your breath, walked with your shoulders hunched, like you were trying to take up as little space as possible." His eyes softened further, a gentle light warming their depths. "Out here you shine." Claire felt heat creep up her neck, into her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments from Sebastian Ashbourne, wasn't used to being seen by him at all, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. "Maybe because out here I'm not just the invisible designer. I'm necessary." "You were always necessary." His voice dropped, low and serious, making sure she heard every word, making sure she understood he meant it. "I was just too blind to see it." The first part of the journey was deceptively easy. The forest floor was relatively clear, the incline gentle enough that they could walk side by side, talk in quiet voices about small things, about what they'd eat when they got home, about hot showers and clean clothes and beds with actual mattresses. But as they began to ascend, the woods grew darker, the trees thicker, their ancient branches tangling together to form a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. The sounds of the forest changed, becoming more muted, more watchful. The atmosphere shifted from neutral to something that felt almost hostile. And then Claire saw it. "Sebastian!" Her voice was a strangled whisper, all the warmth from earlier evaporating in an instant, replaced by ice-cold fear. He was at her side immediately, his body tense, alert, ready. "What is it?" With a trembling hand, she pointed to the ground. Half buried in the damp earth and moss was a bone, yellowed with age, cracked and weathered by seasons and elements, but unmistakably human. A femur, thick and long, and testament to someone who'd walked these woods before them, someone who hadn't made it out. "That can't be." Sebastian's blood ran cold, his voice trailing off as his mind processed implications. Before he could finish the thought, his foot came down on something that didn't belong. Not a rock, not a root, something mechanical, Foreign. There was a sharp metallic click. The world flipped upside down. Claire screamed as Sebastian was violently yanked into the air, a thick rope snare tightening around his ankle. He was left dangling, suspended 10 feet from the ground, swinging like a pendulum, his pack crashing to the forest floor, the spear clattering uselessly against stones. Sebastian! Claire scrambled toward him, her hands reaching up as if she could somehow pull him down, as if her will alone could reverse what had just happened. No, he yelled back, his voice strained with pain and a new terrifying urgency. Blood was already rushing to his head, his face reddening, but that wasn't what made his voice crack with desperation. Claire, get out of here! Run! Now! What? I'm not leaving you! And then she heard it. Drums. A steady rhythmic beating, distant at first, but growing closer with every frantic beat of her own heart. The sound was primal, ancient, the sound of humans who lived by different rules, who saw strangers as threats or resources or both. Sebastian's face, already flushed from hanging upside down, lost all color. Claire, listen to me. His voice was different now, stripped of everything but raw fear, not for himself, for her. You have to hide. Right now, please. I'm not leaving you. If they find you too, we have no chance. He was fighting to keep his voice steady, fighting to think clearly despite the blood pooling in his skull, despite the terror. Hide. Don't come out until you're sure it's safe. I'll get out of this. I swear I'll come back for you. Tears burned Claire's eyes, blurring her vision, making the world swim. But survival instinct, honed over days of wilderness, kicked in. She ran, scrambling behind a massive gnarled tree, pressing her body flat against rough bark, her hand clamped over her own mouth to stifle the sobs trying to escape. The drumming grew louder, more insistent, and then they appeared, figures emerging from the trees like spirits of the forest, adorned with crude paint and animal skins, faces obscured by carved wooden masks, hollow eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing. They carried spears tipped with sharpened stone, moved with the confidence of people who knew this forest, who owned it, an isolated group, cut off from the modern world, living by ancient laws. They surrounded the spot where Sebastian hung, their voices rising in a low guttural chant, a language Claire had never heard, syllables that seemed to have weight, to have power. One of them poked the snare with the butt of his spear, making Sebastian swing. They laughed, a chilling, joyless sound that made Claire's blood freeze. Then, with coordinated practice movements, one of them produced a stone knife. Sliced through the rope, Sebastian fell to the forest floor with a sickening thud. The impact drove air from his lungs, left him gasping. Before he could even think about moving, they were on him, binding his hands and feet with rough, fibrous cords, working with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Claire clamped her hand tighter over her mouth, stifling the scream building in her chest, building pressure like water behind a dam. She watched helplessly as the tribesmen hoisted Sebastian onto their shoulders, as they began to march back the way they'd come, drumming and chanting resuming. As they disappeared into the dense green, the last thing Claire saw was Sebastian's face. He turned his head, eyes desperately searching the trees until they found her hiding spot. His look wasn't fear, it was a silent, desperate command. Survive. Claire didn't know how long she remained pressed against the tree. Time lost meaning. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. The world had shrunk to the sound of her own ragged breathing, the frantic, wild drumming of her heart against her ribs, the crushing realization. He's gone. Taken. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Her lungs burned. No matter how deeply she gasped, it felt like breathing through water, an anxiety attack. Her body was flooded with adrenaline, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to curl up and wait for death or rescue or whatever came first. But then another image pushed through the terror. Sebastian standing between her and the panther, his body a shield. Sebastian awake all night, a solitary guardian. Sebastian kissing her in the rain as if trying to memorize what it felt like to be alive, to be human, to care about something more than survival. A fierce protective rage ignited in her soul, hotter than any fear, stronger than any panic. I'm coming for you. She spoke it aloud, a vow, a promise, a declaration to the forest and to herself and to whatever gods might be listening. Claire pushed away from the tree, her limbs trembling, but obedient. She had to do something, had to act. Waiting meant death, waiting meant losing him. And she'd just found him. Following the trail the tribe left was terrifyingly easy. They'd made no effort to hide their passage. Broken branches, deep impressions in mud, occasional pieces of discarded cord. They moved through their forest with the confidence of apex predators, of people who had no natural enemies. Every snap of a twig made Claire flinch, heart leaping into her throat, but she forced herself forward. One step, then another. Mind a mantra of Sebastian's face, his voice, his touch, his confession in the rain. The trail led to the edge of a large clearing, unnatural in the dense forest, deliberately carved from the wilderness. Claire dropped to her belly in the undergrowth and peered through a screen of ferns. What she saw made her breath catch. A village, not just a few primitive huts. A sprawling settlement, thatched roof structures arranged in careful patterns, smoke curling from multiple fires, people moving about, dozens of them, children playing, women working, men gathered in groups. Normal life, a community. And in the very center of the village, tied to a thick wooden stake driven into the earth, was Sebastian. A sob escaped Claire's lips, muffled by damp soil. He was alive, bruised, a fresh cut bleeding on his cheek, exhausted, but his head lifted, scanned the tree line, still hoping she was safe, still hoping she'd listened. "I'll get you out of there." She whispered it to the empty air, as if he could hear her across the distance, as if promises alone could break ropes and overcome impossible odds. Claire spent hours watching from the forest edge, her mind racing. She was one person. They were a village. She had nothing but determination. They had spears and numbers and home field advantage. She studied patterns, guard rotations, movement flows, blind spots, learned the rhythm of the village. And she noticed something: carved panther totems everywhere, on poles, on structures, on ceremonial stones. The big cat featured prominently in their culture, their art, their identity, and Claire remembered a college anthropology class she'd taken as an elective, the professor discussing isolated tribes, their beliefs, their superstitions, how certain indigenous cultures viewed large predators not as animals but as spirits, as messengers from the supernatural world, the panther that had stalked them, that Sebastian had driven away with fire. That creature might be her only weapon. The idea was insane, reckless, the kind of plan that only made sense when you had no other options, when desperation became strategy. She needed to lure the panther, to bring the spirit of the forest to the village gates, to use their own beliefs and fears against them. It was suicide, but it was also the only card she had left to play. Finding the panther was easier than Claire expected, or perhaps the panther found her. She'd circled back toward the stream, gathering small river stones, heart pounding with a terrifying mix of purpose and dread. She was gathering weapons to provoke a predator. The absurdity of it would have made her laugh in another life. Then she felt it, that sudden oppressive weight in the air, that prickling on the back of her neck that screamed danger, the sensation of being watched by something that saw you as prey. She turned slowly. The panther was there, perched on a low-hanging branch 30 feet away, yellow eyes glowing in the filtered sunlight, tail twitching with that controlled patience that only apex predators possessed, watching her with unnerving intelligence. Every muscle in Claire's body screamed at her to run, to climb, to do anything but stand there exposed and helpless. But she forced herself to stay still, to remember the plan, to trust that desperation and love could somehow overcome instinct. She took one of the stones and threw it. Not hard, not meant to injure, just an insult, a provocation. The stone bounced harmlessly off the branch inches from the panther's paw. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the ground, through her bones, the sound of pure predatory power, ears flattened against skull, lips pulling back to reveal teeth designed to rend and tear. "That's it," Claire whispered. Voice trembling, she began backing away, slowly, deliberately, toward the village direction. "Come on, come with me." She threw another stone, this one landing closer. The panther dropped from the branch, landed with silent grace that belied its massive size, took a step toward her, then another, building momentum, building intent. Claire ran. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, lungs burning with each gasping breath, feet flying over roots and rocks. The sound of the panther's heavy paws pounding earth behind her was a thunderous, terrifying drumbeat. Getting closer, closer. She could feel hot breath on her heels, could almost feel the phantom touch of claws reaching for her back. She wasn't going to make it. But through the trees she saw it, flickering orange light of village fires. The clearing ahead, safety and danger all mixed together. With a final desperate burst of speed and a scream that ripped from the very depths of her soul, Claire burst out of the tree line, right into the heart of the village. The panther, blinded by hunting rage, followed 1 second behind her. Chaos erupted. The village exploded into pure primal panic. The tribespeople didn't see an animal. They saw a nightmare made flesh, a demon of shadow and claw, a vengeful spirit of the forest unleashed in their midst. Screams tore through the air. Figures scattered in every direction, tripping over fires, over each other. Desperate flight from supernatural threat. The panther, momentarily confused by the sudden eruption of noise and movement, spun in a circle, its snarling roar echoing the terror of the villagers, caught between hunting instinct and the chaos of too many targets. Too much stimulation. In the pandemonium, Claire was invisible, just another shadow moving through bedlam. She darted between huts, low to ground, eyes locked on her single objective. Sebastian at the stake in the village center. He saw her, eyes wide with disbelief and sheer terror. His mouth formed words. "What have you done?" But Claire was already there, fingers clawing at the ropes binding him. Thick, fibrous cords pulled brutally tight. Her hands shook, slick with sweat and fear, making the task nearly impossible. "Saving you," she panted, not looking at him, focused entirely on the knots. "You're insane. That thing will kill you. It's busy. Hold still." The panther roared again. Closer. Too close. Claire's fingers worked frantically. One knot began to give, then another. Sebastian wrenched his hands free, immediately worked on the ankle bindings. A moment later, he was up, grabbing her hand. "Run!" They ran into the forest, darkness swallowing them, branches whipping faces, roots threatening to trip. They didn't slow, fueled by fear and adrenaline and the desperate will to live. Village sounds faded behind them. The panther's roar, people shouting, chaos slowly dissolving into distance. They ran until lungs burned, until legs were numb, until the village was nothing more than a distant, fading echo. Finally, they collapsed in a hidden hollow, gasping for air, bodies trembling, exhaustion absolute. For a long moment, they just lay there, breathing, being alive. Then Sebastian surged forward, pulled Claire into an embrace so fierce it drove what little air remained from her lungs. His face buried in her hair, arms a steel cage around her. "You lured a black panther to save me." His voice was muffled against her scalp, rough with emotion, disbelief, awe. Claire let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Seemed like a good idea at the time." He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking dirt-smudged cheeks, looking at her like she was something precious and terrifying and utterly incomprehensible. "You could have been killed. So could you." "Exactly. Why would you risk everything?" Claire pressed her palms to his cheeks, silencing him, making him hear, making him understand. "Because you would have done the same for me. Because we're partners. And partners don't leave each other behind." Something broke in Sebastian's expression. His eyes glistened, devastatingly like tears. "Partners." He repeated the word, testing its weight, its meaning, its promise. They made a cold camp that night. No fire. Too risky. Too visible. There was only darkness, the quiet hum of the forest, and each other. Claire sat with her back against rough bark, Sebastian beside her, their shoulders and hips pressed together, finding warmth and comfort in proximity. "I thought I'd lost you." She confessed it into the darkness, voice barely above whisper. Sebastian found her hand, fingers lacing, a connection that had become their anchor, their lifeline. The silence stretched, comfortable and deep. Then so quietly she almost thought she'd imagined it, he spoke. "I love you, Claire." The world stopped. The forest, the darkness, the fear. It all vanished. There was only those words, hanging in the air, changing everything. Claire turned her head, fast enough to feel her neck crack. "What?" Sebastian met her gaze, his face a landscape of raw vulnerability in the faint starlight filtering through canopy. "I love you. I think I have since the moment you woke up after the crash and I knew I wasn't alone." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Which is ironic, because the truth is, I've always felt alone." "Sebastian, you don't have to say it back." He said it quickly, like he needed to get the words out before courage failed. I just needed you to know. Because if we don't make it out of this, Claire kissed him, poured every ounce of fear and relief and soaring, terrifying love into it. The kiss sealed every unspoken promise, every shared glance, every moment of sacrifice. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. I love you too. Now please try not to get captured by murderous tribes ever again. He laughed, a real, genuine sound of relief that echoed in the quiet hollow. I'll do my best. And that night in the heart of dangerous wilderness, miles from civilization, they were completely, utterly happy. Just one moment. But it was enough. The sound woke Claire from deep, dreamless sleep. Alien, mechanical, a rhythmic chopping that cut through the natural symphony of the forest like a blade. Whump, 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 whump. Her eyes flew open. Helicopter. Sebastian, wake up! She shook him violently. He shot up, instantly awake, body coiled with the reflexive tension of survival. What? What is it? Claire didn't answer her, just pointed at the sky nearby, and there it was, a dark shape against morning clouds, cutting a path through the scowl, the sound of rescue, the sound of return. They scrambled to their feet, stumbling into a small clearing, waving arms frantically, voices raw as they screamed, Here! We're down here! The helicopter flew past, disappearing behind dense canopy. Claire's heart plummeted, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. No, please no. But then it returned, circling lower, searching. They'd been seen, or at least the area had been marked for investigation. They can't see us. Sebastian's mind was already working, always thinking, always strategizing. We need something visible. Claire's eyes landed on their makeshift backpacks, the torn fabric, emergency orange lining faded but still distinct. They worked together, tearing the material into the largest strips possible, spreading it on damp ground, anchoring corners with stones, creating a crude, desperate X. Then they waited, heads tilted back, hearts pounding in unison with the beat of rotors. The helicopter made another pass, then another. Claire held her breath, gripping Sebastian so tight her knuckles went white. Then it began to descend. The moment Claire's feet touched the metal floor of the helicopter cabin, a wave of dizziness so profound she almost collapsed washed over her. A rescuer in flight suit helped her to a seat. Sebastian slid in beside her, his hand never leaving hers. It was over. 2 weeks, 14 days lost in green hell that had nearly consumed them. And now it was over. A paramedic began checking them, his voice a calm, professional drone. But Claire barely heard. Her entire focus was on Sebastian, on the feel of his hand in hers, on the unbelievable reality of vibrating floor beneath her feet. What happens now? The thought was a terrifying whisper. The forest had been their world, brutal but simple. They'd been partners, equals, lovers. But what were they back in the real world? Sebastian squeezed her hand, whispered for her ears only. Nothing changes. But they both knew everything was about to change. The landing at the hospital was a descent into new chaos. The moment the helicopter doors slid open, they were assaulted by a barrage of flashing lights, shouting voices, cameras, reporters, microphones shoved in their faces. Mr. Ashbourne, over here! How did you survive? Is it true there were no other survivors? Sebastian tried to push through the throng, his face a grim mask, arm a protective shield around Claire. But a reporter from a notorious gossip site broke through security. Mr. Ashbourne, sources say you were stranded with a junior employee. Can you comment on the nature of your relationship during the wilderness ordeal? Claire felt Sebastian go rigid. This was it, the moment of truth. She braced herself for denial, for the carefully worded corporate statement, for distance. Instead, he stopped, turned, faced the sea of cameras squarely. The flashes illuminated his face, the exhaustion, the new scars, the dirt still smudged on his cheek. He looked less like a billionaire CEO, more like a warrior returned from war. His voice was clear, steady, ringing with authority that silenced the entire crowd. Claire Morrison saved my life. If I am standing here today, it is because of her and her alone. She is the bravest, most intelligent, and most incredible woman I have ever met. He paused, his eyes finding Claire in the midst of the media storm. And I love her. The silence was absolute. Then chaos exploded, but Sebastian ignored it, took Claire's hand, lifted it in front of cameras, in front of the entire world, and smiled. That real, brilliant, unguarded smile. The smile of a man who had nothing left to hide. Days later, in a private hospital room, the door opened without knocking. Richard Ashbourne entered, his presence instantly sucking warmth from the air. He was older than Sebastian, suit more perfectly tailored, eyes like ice chips. Get out. He didn't look at Claire, voice low and dismissive. She stays. Sebastian's voice was calm, but with steel underneath. Richard closed the door, a soft, menacing click. Have you lost your mind completely? A public declaration for an employee? Stock dropped 3 points. The board is questioning your stability. Sebastian stood, faced his uncle. Then let them question. I'm done living my life for the board, for investors, for you. Sebastian, no, you had your turn. 17 years molding me in your image. Made me cold, calculating. Utterly alone, I will not be that man anymore. Richard's gaze shot to Claire, disgust evident. This is her fault. Manipulation. Stockholm Syndrome. I know what I feel, and for the first time, I'm choosing what matters over what's expected. Richard reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. I control 40% of voting shares. I can have you removed. But more than that, I have witnesses who will testify to professional misconduct. Her career destroyed. Your reputation ruined. Unless you end this, now. The threat hung in the air. Poison and power. Claire started to stand, started to sacrifice herself, but Sebastian held up his hand. Do it. Take your shares. Destroy my reputation. Drag us through scandal, but I will not give her up. The two men stared each other down. Finally, Richard turned. One last venomous look at Claire. Then he was gone. Door slamming. Sebastian swayed, bravado draining. Claire was at his side instantly. You just threw away everything. No, he looked at her, really looked at her. I chose. For once, I chose. 2 weeks later, they met at a small coffee shop. Sebastian already there, 2 cups waiting. When he saw her, his entire face lit up. I have a proposition. He leaned forward, intent and hopeful. I'm starting a new company, something smaller, something mine, and I want you to be my partner. 50-50, equal everything. Claire's eyes widened. I don't know how to run a business, but you know me, and I trust you more than anyone. She looked at the man across from her. Not the Ice King, just Sebastian. Real, vulnerable, hopeful. One condition, we do it our way. No cutting corners, we build something that matters. His smile widened. I wouldn't expect anything less. They sealed it with a handshake, then a kiss that tasted like coffee and new beginnings. 6 months later, Sebastian took Claire back to the mountains. Different mountains, safe mountains with marked trails. He led her to a summit overlooking a valley painted in sunset colors. He dropped to one knee. When the plane went down, I thought I'd wasted my entire life. I had money and success, but nothing that mattered. No one who really knew me. Then there was you. He pulled out a small velvet box. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing with absolute certainty. I don't want to face any of it without you. Claire Morrison, will you marry me? She couldn't speak, just dropped to her knees, threw her arms around him, kissed him with everything in her soul. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their story had started with a fall from the sky, a brutal game of survival against impossible odds. But it ended here, on top of a mountain, with a promise, with a choice, with the beautiful, undeniable truth. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find the one thing that truly matters: each other.